often described as a children's story. I don't know about you, Mr. Crypto, but my stories growing up didn't frequently involve the evisceration of live animals or slitting of animal throats.
I would not suggest doing this with Mason as his next read-along.
Let's talk about A Prisoner in the Caucasus by Leo Tolstoy today.
I am Trapped Crypto.
And I am the freed Una. And welcome to the CodeX Cantina, where we go a step deeper into the books that we read. This week, we are going to be diving into heavy detail on A Prisoner in the Caucasus by Leo Tolstoy. If you are new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button if you are down for that type of a journey.
And as always, we start off with publication information. And if you would like to read this for free, we'll leave a link down in the description below at our favorite Gutenberg.org website.
We also have a second link to a New Yorker article that I will be referring to.
So this was published in 1872 by Leo Tolstoy, and this one is based off real events while he served time in the military.
Now, I looked more into this story after reading it because, first of all, let's make sure we have the right framework for how we discuss this. Are you familiar with what the Caucasus Mountains are in terms of meaning for the whole world?
Teach me.
So, are you familiar with the story of Prometheus?
Yes.
He gave fire
to man.
And was exiled, right? Guess where he was exiled?
The Caucasus Mountains.
So, typically, these have represented exile for a lot of literature, okay? And there's several different countries, several different regions kind of covering this area. It was a very popular trade area between Europe and Asia. So it's not uncommon that similar areas might have similar lore. But get this, also specifically in Russian literature, it also represents exile. Can you guess why?
Because it's really cold?
No, I mean, literally, they just exiled people there. And I don't like you. I'm sending you to the Caucasus Mountains. But your boy, Pushkin, wrote a poem, I believe it was, an Ode to Liberty, and was sent to the Caucasus because it was kind of anti-Tsarist, like during Tsardom and such, that he's like, okay, we're going to exile you for a little while. And he was sent to the Caucasus Mountains, and he actually was the first one to write A Prisoner in the Caucasus, roughly, was his narrative poem that he wrote basically at the time during his exile as well, interestingly enough.
Okay, so this is his punishment.
This was punishment, correct. And he wrote the story about this, and I guess the legend goes, now whether this is true or not is another thing, but Leo Tolstoy took this and put a different spin on it. Because your boy Pushkin, as you know, is a little bit more of a romantic, right? He's got kind of a star-crossed lover. Have you ever read the poem?
I didn't get a chance to read the poem, no.
So it's a little bit more of a star-crossed lover poem, you know, finding love in places where you wouldn't expect to find love. It's very romantic, which is typical of Pushkin. Well, along comes Tolstoy, right? He's not the idealist type of guy that Pushkin is. And he wanted to bring more realism to the story, is what the legend says. And he kind of modeled this story after some events that really did happen to him while he served in the army, in the military.
So he slapped a dose of reality on this.
He reality slapped it real hard because
Okay.
There's no star-crossed lovers in this. But there is an interesting relationship with Dina that we'll talk about in a little bit. But I wanted to just kind of bring that up in terms of the framework that these mountains represent a place where you go for penance, a place for self-reflection, a place for finding who you are. And maybe the mountains even bringing that out in you as you experience a lot of different cultures, right? Because we saw in this piece, there's not just Judeo-Christian God, I guess, in a sense, but there's a couple of other cultures that are referenced. You know, they talk about Allah and stuff like that. And scholars who are much, much more smarter, much more educated than I am, have researched the story, and they can confirm that a lot of what Tolstoy wrote is incredibly accurate for how people would have worshipped, prayed, or acted at this time when this was written.
Interesting that with all of that the story does focus heavily on relationships between the different main characters in the story. And how they treat one another.
Well, and it's so different than the usual Tolstoy that we get. We usually get this moral compass, parable, very easy to understand.
And why is that? What's so unique about this story compared to the others we've done?
Well, this was written in 1872. Right? This was before his profound religious awakening, which happened in 1880. So before that, we have... I don't know if he would describe himself as an atheist. I think we can call him an atheist. But he wasn't the born-again Christian anarchist that we have been kind of studying over the past year.
Definitely different philosophy on outlook of life, and thus having a different writing style.
And different outlook of even God that I will kind of talk to a little bit in this story as well.
Awesome.
Let's do a quick plot recap. This is going to be a real quick one, and then let's kind of jump into a quick discussion on this.
Okay.
As if we hadn't already been discussing it, I guess. So again, I will try my best on the names. We mispronounce things all the time, but we do try. So Julien, he receives a letter prompting him to return home to his mother and possibly be married off to a nice young lady. However, it's dangerous to travel through the Caucasus alone. He travels with a convoy so as not to be attacked. However, him and his friend decide to kind of ride ahead because the convoy is going too slow and it's sweltering hot outside. But they promise if they stick together, it'll all be all right. Spoiler, things aren't all right. They are captured and brought to an enemy camp where Abdul Murat purchases them and plans to ransom them back to the Russians for some money. So the two prisoners start to kind of cope with the situation in very different ways, I guess is one way to put it. And Julien constantly is trying to escape, to return home, make best of his life while in captivity, and even make friends with the little girl while he's there, while his friend just kind of exists and accepts his lot in life. So at the end, they kind of attempt to escape through a forest. They're recaptured, put in a mud pit. You know, the final straw where they're saved by the. In Pushkin is kind of the star-crossed relevant, right? Here it's the little girl that he befriended, helps him get out of this pit, and finally they escape in a last-minute daring dash back to the Russians. It's kind of dramatic. All in all, I said this was very quick. This was a very, as far as just straight narrative prose, like this is a very well-written story. This is a very solidly written story. But we're going to go now into more of the analysis and kind of talk about maybe what are some of the meanings or things behind it. And I think this one's a little bit more difficult than the usual Tolstoy that we've done in the past.
Which is interesting because it's more of a straight story and it lends itself to, you would think, be easier to understand. But because there's no deep philosophical meaning religious-wise and there's no supernatural twist to it, it actually ends up being more difficult.
Well, I'll say this. I think the most interesting part about this is the fact that it's a Caucasus-related story, of which you and I don't have tons of experience. This would be similar to maybe there's people out there that love Mississippi River-based literature. They love stories around the Mississippi. The Mississippi is part of what founded a lot of old school American ways. It was representative of the flow, of the divide at the time. There's probably a lot more in this story that you and I are trying to pull out and learn more about, that someone that's really into Caucasus-related literature would potentially grab more onto, to kind of like what we started talking about earlier, right? In terms of the exile and finding oneself.
Yeah, I think that this story could be seen as a cultural melting pot of information for Russian people and history, like you said with the Mississippi River for us in the United States.
So one thing I'm going to bring up, so I had to kind of Google what the meaning of the person's name was because I was kind of curious. You always got to kind of look at Tolstoy names, and he always kind of embeds them with meanings, right? So what's interesting here is your boy Pushkin, you know, the original poem writer, when he wrote this version of the story, the main character had no name.
Unnamed narrator. Yeah, okay.
Unnamed narrator. And now this story, okay, we have Julien, which I looked it up, and from a webpage, I learned that the name suggests several things, but most of all is that it's an ordinary name with a name meaning life, or more closely to the words meaning vein or tendon. And I think we saw a little bit of that with this character, where he was the one that was pushing for more from life. He was the one trying to escape. He was making, even while he was in prison, he was making the best that he could and forming relationships with the people there that he could to try to understand them. He was the one that was more life-seeking than accepting that his friend was. That was just kind of like, I wrote the letter, I'm waiting to be saved. He was literally dragged along on the journey, as opposed to Julien, who was more life-seeking, which is, I think, kind of a first thing to talk about, right?
As we talked about with the connection between peoples, you could also say that veins or tendons connect things in the body, and he's making those connections with other people through the story, and he's one of the ones that's trying to forge those relationships because they mean a lot to him.
They do. Even though he knows he's trying to escape, he's still forges them, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's something a little bit more about Tolstoy with how this was written in 1872 before his 1880, religious awakening. Okay. Did you notice much about the main character's views on God in the story?
He seemed to view God as like apathetic, I felt like.
I feel like you're saying that right after we read Sirens of Titan, where they had the Church of the Utterly Indifferent.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Maybe I'm overlapping here.
Well, no, I like it. No, I like it because I'm actually going to back you up on that, where what we see in this story with, if God pleases, return to service again with my blessing. You have these observations on Allah and other cultures' gods. There's 12 usages of God in this story. Okay? So our boy Tolstoy doesn't ignore the fact that God exists, right? Even though he is probably some form of atheist at this point. But we have him say lines like, say, God has led him past us. Get up, let us go on. Remember when the horses are chasing them? So one thing that I've noticed is, particularly for people that aren't heavily religious, is that they'll use God as just fate. This is what's going to happen because of fate. If your sentence works the same way with the word fate as with the word God, my guess is most likely you're looking at an atheist writer. And then what's interesting is if you flip it to look at the devil side, we have this quote where the devil's influence choices, where he says, "Why the devil did I saddle myself with this block?" So the opposite of God is a personal choice, I feel like, for a lot of atheists, with using devil to say, I made a bad decision. And I'm curious to see if we read more pre-1880 Tolstoy, will we be able to just completely just replace the word God with the word fate and see that he's using this as, this is the way of the world, of the Church of the Utterly Indifferent, and see if that's like a pattern that atheist Tolstoy was using in these stories.
I like that. I guess I felt that because he included all the different gods, it made him feel indifferent about it, and thus the character felt indifferent about it. Be like, well, you got your god, and you got your god, and you got your god, and which one of us is right? I think that's Tolstoy's religious apathy there bleeding into the story.
I think we have a lot more to learn about that, but that's something I definitely want to keep our eye on. Now, the last kind of thing I wanted to kind of just talk about is friendship. What did you think about the usage of friendship in this story?
I felt like it was more of a plot device than anything else, that it was used to drive the story from the next scene to the next scene to the next scene. And I felt like, again, here, Tolstoy is trying to say that the only thing that matters in life are these friendships that you're going to forge with these people, but not everybody is going to do it the same as our main character.
It's weird, too, because they made that promise in the beginning, don't ever leave me. And then they totally just leave each other all the time. And how he's talking about how I'll never leave you behind. And he's like, I can't walk anymore. He's like, all right, I'm going to leave you behind. There wasn't a huge aha moment for me, though. There may be something there. But it just felt very inconsistent, some of the friendships in this. That while Gillian may have tried to make friends with Dina, it's something that he ultimately severed. He forged a friendship with his friend here, but when it was death or the friendship, he severed the friendship even. So it was very strange to me the way that friendship was looked upon in this, where even you could argue there was some type of a relationship with the owner, right? How he kept saying, you good, me good. Like, because we're good, we can relate to each other. We can connect with one another. We may not have the same God. We may not have the same language or the same culture, but since we're both good.
No, I felt like because they're always trying to separate from one another, that there really wasn't a real friendship there, that it was the basis where he's saying, we have to stick together, but in the end they don't. So was there really a friendship there? And I don't know why Tolstoy is creating these fake relationships.
No, I completely agree. If I oversold that I thought they were friends, I misspoke. There was like the surface presentation of friendship with him and Dina, with him and this guy that got into trouble, with him and the slave owner. And then at the end, when he reunites with his brethren that do speak the same language and do know his tribe, there was never really a strong friendship connection, and it was always willing to be severed is really where I was going with that.
Yeah, and maybe that's just the realism of this story, coming through.
The army, the ex-army guy that's like, yeah, I've been through this. It sucks. You will sell anyone out to survive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the original poem is this romantic, very intimate story between star-crossed lovers or whatever, here we see that dose of reality where, like, no, real relationships and friendships aren't like that unless you work towards it. And these people weren't working towards that together. One of them was, Julian was, but nobody else was. And so you see what truly happens in life, and maybe this is more of one of those moral tales than we're giving it credit for.
Okay, so is this going to be the argument for this piece? Are we saying the argument is friendships are, you have to put work into it and it doesn't just magically happen? It's not this romantic poem that Pushkin put out there, that real life does have barriers between friendships and it's something that takes work. Is that our argument for this?
Yeah, and I think that you aren't friends by circumstance either, right? Just because you happen to be prisoners together, that doesn't mean you're definitely going to come together and work together and be friends to survive. And you may just help each other out of necessity, and then later, you'd have to work at this friendship, and it doesn't happen here in the story. So, yeah, I think that's a good argument.
We'll put it this way. You're my friend, Crypto, right? If we are in a convoy together, going through enemy territory, and the guy with the gun's like, hey, does anybody want to move forward with me and just leave this convoy behind with no weapons? Probably going to go with the guy with the gun, right?
Unless you know that I'm a better shot.
Oh, there was even commentary on that too in this. Interesting.
Yeah.
So overall, a very interesting story. That's kind of like what our breakdown is for this. Crypto, give me your ratings.
This one, I feel like they're both kind of the same. I think it was a very straightforward story. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I think for analysis, just talking about, a little bit of the Tolstoy before he gets religious vibe, the friendship vibe, there's not a lot of meat on the bone here for literary analysis. I'm just going to give this a solid 5 for both rankings.
Well, and that's also with our current experience. For all we know, if we were really into Caucasus-related literature, this could be a goldmine for all we know. Right?
Could be, yeah.
So for our experience, a subjective rating, I'm going to go, what did you say you were, a 5?
5 for both, yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I'm a 5 for both as well.
Okay.
Well, all right. Thank you for joining us on our discussion of A Prisoner in the Caucasus by Leo Tolstoy. What did you guys think? Please let us know in the comments down below. If you're down for literature discussions like this, we find stuff every week to talk about. So please consider joining us on the journey. We're going to have videos up every Monday and Thursday. Hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you. Una out.
Peace.